Good evening, everybody. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Somerville Planning Board. It is Thursday, February 18th, 2021. It's 6:02 p.m. according to my computer. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, as well as Mayor Curtatoni's declaration of emergency dated March 15th, 2020. This meeting of the Planning Board will be conducted via remote participation. We will have an audio recording available upon request as soon as possible after the meeting. This meeting is being recorded. For the record, I am Mike Capuano. I'm the chairman of the Planning Board. With me is Amelia Aboff, the vice chair, Sam Denning, the clerk, Jahan Habib, and Rob Buchanan. We have a full contingent of planning board members, and we have a number of items on our agenda this evening. First, the approval of two sets of meeting minutes from September 3rd, 2020 and October 1st, 2020. We are also opening two public hearings, 3 Hawkins Street as one case, and 152 to 158 Broadway as another case. We also have on our agenda other business for the Summer Vision Comprehensive Plan. It is my understanding that staff has been working to amend some of the language on the Summer Vision Plan, so it would be in the best interest of the Planning Board to continue discussion of Summer Vision until our next meeting, when that language will expect to be finalized. I believe that next meeting is March 18th. So the chair moves to continue discussion of Summer Vision to our next regularly scheduled meeting, seconded by the clerk. Roll call vote. The chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Amelia votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
Great, thank you. That agenda item is continued. Before we get into the public hearings, I am going to, and our other business, I'd like the clerk to read into the record the notices of those two public hearings. So I'm going to defer to our clerk, Sam.
The first is 3 Hawkins Street Union Square LLC proposes to construct a 5-story net zero ready apartment building and establish a household living principal use for 59 dwelling units in the MR5 zoning district. The proposal requires site plan approval and a special permit. Second is 152 to 158 Broadway. Broadway Investments Realty LLC proposes to construct a 5-story net zero ready general building and establish a household living principal use for 45 dwelling units in the MR5 zoning district with no parking provided on site. This proposal requires site plan approval and 2 special permits.
Thank you very much, Sam. I do want to make a note for anyone that's in attendance this evening. Please do not use the chat feature. It is not part of the public record. It is not something to which we will be responding. We will be opening these public hearings up to testimony. So if you're interested in providing testimony, comments, questions, that would be the time to do it. Similarly, if you are an applicant or involved in an applicant's team, there will be opportunities for you to speak at that time as well. So thank you very much. I want to, before we move on to the hearings, get the minutes out of the way. So as the planning board has an opportunity to review the meeting minutes of September 3rd, 2020. So find there. Has anybody got any suggested revisions or comments? Yes, Amelia.
Mr. Chair, I just noticed that there is an applicant name that is spelled inconsistently, so one instance or the other might need to be corrected.
Okay, I would ask that when we vote to approve the minutes, that they be corrected for that inconsistency by staff by the time that the minutes are published. Or any other comments or questions on the September 3rd minutes? No? Seeing none, the chair moves to adopt those minutes, seconded by the clerk. Chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Amelia votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
Thank you. We have meeting minutes. Next are the meeting minutes from October 1st, 2020. Does anybody have any comments or questions or proposed revisions to those meeting minutes? Okay, seeing none, the chair moves to adopt the meeting minutes of October 1st, 2020, seconded by the clerk. Chairman votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Amelia votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
Great, we have meeting minutes. Awesome. We are going to open up the agenda to our two public hearings. I will take them in the order in which they are listed. So we'll take 3 Hawkins Street first. I would like to invite the applicant to be unmuted, or the applicant's representative and or team to be unmuted. It is also my understanding that, I don't know if he's still here, that JT Scott is in the audience. And I would invite Councilor Scott to address the board following the applicant's presentation and before the opening of public testimony, if he wishes to do so. It is the practice of the planning board to open up for comment, for public comment and official comment by elected officials, knowing fully well that they often have other meetings that are responsible to be attending. So if Councilor Scott wishes to speak at the conclusion of the presentation, I would welcome him to do so.
Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. I am unmuting the applicant, Peter Quinn, Scott Zink, and I also understand that Aaron Fitch. I would like to ask that Aaron Fitch has 2 links. Could you please use the raise hand function for the account that you would like me to? Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Chair, all of the applicant team is unmuted.
Good evening, I'm Peter Quinn, architect, Davis Square, and very happy to be in front of you after a long process to get here. We were actually in one of the last applicants under the old zoning, and not to belabor the history, but it is somewhat amusing. We weren't able to get in front of the ZBA for this application. It would have gone to under the old zoning, so we ended up having to reapply under the new zoning to the ZBA. We had a 6-story building at that time. We had a lot of neighborhood support, but it was not compliant, and we would have had to ask for a lot of variances. So we definitely got the pushback from the ZBA on that. And we redesigned the building as a 5-story, eventually coming to you now under the MR5 regulations as the special permit granting authority with a completely compliant zoning compliant building. It is now a passive house net zero ready building. So this is actually, as architects, this is our 3rd building in Somerville that we're putting forth as a passive house. We're quite excited about the prospect of being able to put these sorts of buildings forward as a standard for the city. And so I'm going to take you through the design and a little bit at first with some of the process that we've been through. Although it has been a long time to get here, the applicant from the very beginning engaged the neighborhood with at least 3 neighborhood meetings and innumerable discussions with neighbors and neighborhood representatives and with the ward councilor to get to this point. And I think this is almost, I would say, an exemplary process that really engaged the neighborhood from the very beginning. And what you have and what we're presenting is something that we felt we have the substantial, if not full support neighborhood behind us. So with that, I'll just take you through some of the, first let me just show you the site itself. On the screen, I think this will work. All right. Can you all see my screen at this point? There we go. It says show my screen, so I'm going to assume that that works. I'm now showing a context satellite view of the site. You'll see Somerville Ave on the left, and Washington Street is on the right, just on the side. And we've outlined the site, which is kind of in this little valley between, connects Somerville Ave to Washington, which is Hawkins Street, intersected by Lake at about the midpoint. This is currently an auto body shop, which would come down. We've already received demolition approval for it. Probably no love lost with these buildings. This building in the neighborhood, there is a 2.5-story wood frame building which has been empty for quite a while, and that would also come down. We received permission from the Historic Preservation Commission for that as well. So this is the auto body shop. It runs down Lake Street, as you can see. So the line array that we have is approximately, hang on a second. It's at 13,000, it's almost 14,000 square feet, so it's a fairly sizable piece of property. It is abutting other MR5 districts, except for across the street, and it abuts, doesn't abut, but the neighbors across the street are all NR. And it is certainly been an industrial site for many, many years. Going back quite a ways, there is some cleanup on the site that has to be done, mostly petroleum type products. And there's very, very high water table, so we're somewhat hesitant to get into a deep excavation on this site. We believe that we are compliant with zoning. We did an extensive zoning analysis, looking through all the different aspects of the new zoning. We had to go back quite a few times to get it right. It is quite a bit of material to present. We also, as you know from the staff report, we also complied with the mobility report, the sustainable Somerville report, and the landscape urban forestry guidelines for green score. The building itself is a 5-story building, but has setbacks. We presented in, I think you can see this in this view here. We presented as a 4-story along Lake Street, along the proposed park for the 346 Somerville Ave project, in which we share an elevation. And we stepped back for the 5th floor on these two sides. We've also presented townhouse-like entries for 4 residences along Lake Street to give a sense of scale and sort of neighborhoodness to that streetscape there. This is an aerial view, give you a little better idea of how these two buildings fit together. And there's the park with its ellipse. As it turns out, we are using the same landscape architect as the 346 Somerville Ave project is as well. So there was some integration there. Going a little further, this, I'm sorry, I skipped one, didn't do that. This is a corner view that you would see as you come around, there we go. Coming down Hawkins, Lake Street is coming in from the left, and then Hawkins continues up to Somerville Ave on the right. So, essentially what we have is a strong base made out of brick, and then 3 levels of residential that are outlined in kind of a lighter colored paneling. And then the 5th floor step back respectfully on the 3 sides that you see from the street or from the park in order to create roof balconies as well. And then at the very top, which you don't see in this, except for maybe a little bit peeking out, is a common roof deck as well. There's a view further up Hawkins, actually standing in Somerville Ave. I think we don't show a building here that would block the view, but I just wanted to show essentially the context here. And then finally, back from Somerville Ave, looking through what is now a parking lot, you see the side of the building, which is treated a little more plainly. This will eventually, we assume, be covered by, be blocked by another building. And then finally, there's a corner view from the park itself, looking at the building that we have. I'll take you through some plan now, if that's all right, especially with the ground floor. So the building in this plan that you're seeing, the bottom of the page is Lake Street, and Hawkins Street is on the right. The corner would be coming in from the left-hand side, the right-hand side here. So the side facing Lake Street, as I mentioned, we create a little townhouses are actually just 1-story, 1-bedroom units with their own entries. They also have entries from the common hallway inside the building. The interior of the building has a number of amenities. There's a nice lobby looking out to the street, a common balcony that all members can use and interact with neighbors. We also have a common room, which will likely be a small fitness room. And then we have a living room in the back that looks out to the park, which is on the left side of this page. That'll be quite a nice amenity and could be used as a community room as well, open to scheduled meetings with neighborhoods, people, presentations and that kind of thing. We have what I would call an open garage. It's not heated, for 13 cars, and then 2 additional spaces outside that garage for a total of 15 spaces, which gives a ratio of about 0.25 spaces per unit. We're a 59-unit building. So
now, excuse me, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. You've got 59 units, and you're proposing 15 parking spaces, right?
That's right.
Okay. And is this building within a transit area as it's defined in the new zoning?
Yes, it is. It is
Okay.
within a quarter mile.
That's what I thought. I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, and I apologize if it's hard to know what I should emphasize and not. But yes, it is. It is. It's actually within the half-mile walk. So, yeah. Shall I continue?
Yes, please.
All right. So we have an extensive bike parking program in this building. We have short-term bikes spaces around the perimeter of the building, integrated into the sidewalk areas. We also have wall-hung bikes in the garage itself. And then we have an oversized elevator to take bikes down to a basement level where we have a very large bike storage room, workshop for repairs, cleaning bikes. We have a large space for storage of cargo bikes or tandems. We can fit those as well. And we have space to expand the bike program if needed. There would not be a problem to do. However, this is a limited basement. As I mentioned, the water table is an issue here. So we are just limiting it primarily to this residential use and some utility rooms, this residential bike room and utility rooms. The other aspects of this, of course, we're going to pre-wire at least 4 charging stations for electric cars. We do have a package and mail room, which will provide enough space for normal package delivery. That's in this vestibule area. Moving on a little bit, one of the things that we had misinterpreted on the zoning was the need for a 12-foot wide sidewalk area. So our landscape architect will talk a little bit about how we handled that later on. But what we did is we did in fact push the building back from our original design in order to create a 12-foot area that could be used for sidewalk. We left the existing sidewalk as it is and then put in ground cover for that additional area. We did not use that ground cover in our green score calculation. We just provided as a visual amenity. And we do have some trees planted in that area, which we can talk about later, but the idea was to, if the idea is to push the building back in order to not impose the mass of the building so strongly on the sidewalk, then I think we've accomplished that. We've done that by leaving the 12 feet of sidewalk area and then about another 2 feet of setback that's required in this district. So total of 14 feet from the curb line. I probably should have mentioned more emphatically that the building is a passive house building with 59 units. Passive house is, if you're not familiar with it, does have a lot of material on the exterior of the building. The exterior of the building is quite a complicated thing to construct because there's about 5 inches of insulation outside the actual structure of the building. So all that's held off the building front. Now, fortunately, in the new zoning, there's a way to accommodate that, and we do have that plan for our building throughout. Let me just get my bearings. The entries for the building are twofold. One off Hawkins Street, where one would come into a vestibule and then into a lobby and then up in the elevator to your unit. And the other is off this is a secondary entry, of course, but off the park. You enter into the living room area and down the hallway. And then the third area is if you have a parking space, you'll enter through the garage, from the garage. We also have a trash chute and the capacity to take that directly into a compactor inside the building and then out into the garage at the required time. Let's see. Taking you through the views already. Our materials are fairly straightforward. As I mentioned, we do have pretty significant exterior requirement with the insulation. So we are limited on putting any kind of heavy material on the exterior. We have to be very careful about that because of the cantilevered weight of all that. So we are using a fiber cement lap siding, one with an 11-inch exposure, which is a little lighter than normal. And then fiber cement panels, we have a brick base, brick veneer base with a sort of contemporary colored mortar. And then all the trim is fiber cement as well. We are holding up some pretty significant roof decks, roof planters. So those are actually spec as kind of a aesthetic element as well. I should show you the plan for the roof deck. This Aaron has a more ornate version of this, but we've got about 2,000 square feet set up for solar panels generating electricity, and then all of our condensers are collected in the middle of the roof where they will not be visible from the street. And then we have a roof deck which is about 600 square feet, maybe a little more. Yeah, sorry, 700 square feet of roof deck, and a small landing and lobby at that area. So this is open to all of the room residents, although some of the units do have their own private balconies, especially the 5th floor. I think we've exceeded the usable unit open space by quite a bit for this building. So I just want to mention before I finish the conditions that actually, why don't I come back to that? I'm going to pass the screen to Erin so that she can talk a little bit about the landscape plans as well. I'll bring those up. Okay.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
So delving into the landscape plan with the new setback of the building. Yes, Erin Hosseini Fitch from Verdant Landscape Architecture. So with the new building setback, we have much more larger buffer between the building facade and the sidewalk, as Peter mentioned. So within the space, we're able to incorporate a larger plant bed full of mixed perennial plantings, keeping in mind if any future changes were to happen within the 12-foot easement for the sidewalks, this could easily be done with only the perennial plantings. And then within the space, we're also incorporating deciduous upright trees that complement the architecture, but also act as street trees. And in the case that the sidewalk was to be widened, the street trees would maintain and stay in place. So it'd still be a pleasing path for pedestrians to walk by. And then along Hawkins Street, we're able to maintain a minimum of a 6-foot width sidewalk along the whole stretch. And we're also proposing large shade trees. So it's also very comfortable and pleasant pedestrian streetscape as well. And then along the northern and western property lines, the plants proposed are used to create year-round screening and privacy for the abutters and for our site as well. Shade trees and upright trees are also used in these instances. And then back on the western property, going back towards Lake Street, we are including that accessible connection to the new public park. And as Peter mentioned, Verdant is also involved with this. So throughout the entire process, we're making sure that both of these sites are integrated to create a very residential and community feeling between these two senses of space. And then going to the 5th floor roof decks. As Peter mentioned, these are showing private patios for the various units on this floor. And bordering all these patios are planters that will provide year-round screening and interest, as they are not seasonal. They're actually permanent planters that are a mix of shrubs and ornamental grasses. And then moving on to the roof deck, we're proposing an expanse of extensive green roof to create a sustainable environment and also a pleasing aesthetic for those using the common roof deck. And then we're using sedum mat in this area. And then a brief overview of our plantings. Majority of the plants selected are hardy native species that will succeed in this environment, with the addition of a few other plantings that were chosen due to their hardiness as well as their aesthetic. So you can see there's the upright tree here, as well as maples and other native species. And then straightforward materials for our roof deck, we're using pedestal pavers. And then you can also see the year-round interest of the red-tailed dogwood and junipers used on the roof decks. And then lastly, we have our green score. And as you can see, we exceed the minimum requirement of 0.20, and we have reached 0.23 throughout the 3 landscape plans. And then also on the other set, we have supporting details to show our compliancy.
Thanks, Aaron. So I'll just finish by saying that we have read through the conditions. We have no issues with any of them. One of the issues that was brought up about traffic mitigation and participating in pedestrian crossings and curb extensions and the like. And this is something we've discussed with the neighborhood from the very beginning, and we certainly would very much like to engage in that design process with the neighborhood and with the engineering department and traffic department to get that right. So no problem there whatsoever. All the other matters are things that we expect to comply with completely. And I'll pass it back to you folks. Thank you.
So there are a number of things that I'd like to ask and discuss, but I tend to leave my comments and questions after we hear oral testimony, just because some of my questions might be shared with the news, and I think their testimony is more valuable than my speculation. So what I'd like to do is open up to any members of the planning board that would like to ask questions or comments of the development team or of staff at this point. No? Okay.
I have questions, but I also plan to hold mine until after the Q&A, public hearing.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Rob. All right. At this time, what I'd like to do, by the way, is there any presentation by or comments by staff? Open this up. Okay. What I'd like to do now is open up the portion of this public hearing to testimony for folks that want to speak in support of the application. And what I'd ask you to do is to do the raised hand function next to your name, and I will call on you in the order in which I see you. There's a 2-minute timer, so be advised that you will be asked to stop at the expiration of that time to respect everyone's evening. And when I recognize you, if you choose to speak, I would ask that you give your name and residential address for the record so we have it. So anybody that wants to speak in support of this application, please raise your hand now. Going once. Going twice. I see JT Scott and Jeff Burns. I'm scrolling just to make sure I don't miss anyone else except for those two at this point. I will keep looking as folks speak too, so I don't feel like I have to go now or not. And I see a third. So the order in which I saw now 3 hands, I'm going to ask for Jeff Burns to be unmuted and to provide testimony.
Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. Jeff, you are now unmuted, but you're self-muted.
Hi there, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Hi, my name is Jeff Burns. I live at 294 Summer Street, and I've just listened to this presentation by Mr. Quinn, and I think it's great. I think they've done a lot of hard work to listen to the neighborhood. I think they've proposed something, it's within zoning, after having obviously a long journey to get here, as Mr. Quinn mentioned. And I think that's great. I think that's why we overhauled our zoning and spent so much time and energy on it. And it's great that it's pushed the development in the direction of being, passive house or net zero. It's pushed it to have less parking because it's close to transit. It's got a lot of bike parking, which will make up for, some of that car parking for folks who aren't taking the bus or the train places. And it's got the green score, again, another good piece of our new zone. So, I think that's all great. So I'm in favor. Thanks.
Thank you. I saw JT Scott's hand next, so I'd like to recognize JT. I may have other places to be, so I'd certainly like him to be unmuted now and provide his testimony unless he'd like to wait.
All right, thank you, Chair Capuano and members of the planning board. Just speaking as a nearby resident, it's one of the very few passive house projects in Somerville. I'm excited to see the presentation. I appreciate the parking is screened and enclosed with a garage door and the expanded setbacks and setbacks from the existing sidewalk to allow more space to breathe and improve on the existing condition. From a transportation standpoint, I'm happy to know this building is not going to be eligible for resident parking permits due to the presence of the walk shed area. And the developer has committed to a video screen of the lobby showing arrival times of nearby buses and transit to help facilitate transit use. I also note with some gratitude the retention of the ribbon pavers in the right-of-way that's on the west face of the building, abutting the park, which I think will be a useful area for moving vans to get off the street or move in and move out. In the neighborhood meetings we had, of particular interest in the neighborhood was the additional condition to require improvements to the intersection of Lake and Hawkins, hopefully to include bump outs in the sidewalk and raised crosswalks across both streets, or even a raised table for the entire intersection, as this is a heavily traveled route for young children to Argenziano, Lincoln Park, Walnut Street Park, multiple nearby preschools once our schools open. One remaining question I still have is regarding the Hawkins Street frontage sidewalk area. In an earlier plan, a pull-up area was depicted there for anticipated ride share and delivery drop-offs and pickups. I don't see it on this package and would be interested to hear from planning staff or the applicant as to why that changed and what the proposal will be for handling that type of temporary stop at traffic on Hawkins. Another question, which may be more the purview of the traffic commission, but the planning board may also wish to weigh in, is as to the location and number of on-street spaces on the south face on Lake Street, because neighbors on the south side of Lake Street may have difficulty pulling out of their driveways with the presence of that in Ellis Square. And I'm sorry, I know it's long. It has been a very long process. The neighborhood meetings did happen in 2019, and we have not had a subsequent meeting since the project moved from a story to a 5-story proposal. But the presentation appears to be very consistent with the concerns expressed by the neighbors, and I believe it's addressed many of the most serious concerns and has fairly broad support in its current form. With that said, though, if there are neighbors here tonight that have specific concerns that want to be addressed, I have absolute confidence in the planning board to help ensure that that happens. This has been an unusual process that did not go through the usual UDC review process that we have in place now, partially just because of how it has bridged both the pandemic and the transition in zoning. But that's why I'm glad we have such great expertise in the planning board now. So thank you for your forbearance on my extra time.
Thank you very much. I do see some other folks with their hands raised, but I also see that Councilor Matt McLaughlin has joined us. And as I said at the beginning, it's always the planning board's preference to have elected officials who might want to speak on applications, kind of jump the line in case they have other official applications. So if Councilor McLaughlin wants to speak on the Hawkins Street application, I think he's here for the other one, but if he wants to, Matt, if you want to do the raised hand, we'll recognize you. If not, we can move forward. Okay. What I'd like to do then is recognize Justin Fiddler to provide testimony. So if Justin Fiddler could be unmuted.
Hello, this is Justin Fiddler. I'm at 22 Ellington. I don't have as great of a detail-oriented take as the other two people that called in, but I think all of everything I saw was very good, and this housing is exactly what Somerville needs, and the fact that it's minimal parking and a lot of units adds density to Somerville, and that will help end the rent crisis. And I appreciate that. That's all I got.
Great, thank you very much. Scroll, I see one other person with his hand raised, Alexander Frieden. So if I could ask for Alexander Frieden to be unmuted to be able to provide testimony.
Thank you, Chair Capuano and Planning Board. I live at, my wife and our family live at 4 Lake Street, directly across from this building. We've been kind of part of this project since its onset. This project has the 5-story version is very similar to the 6-story one. I want to commend the planning team around the raised crosswalks that will be at the Lake and Hawkins intersection, which was requested by the community, and the cargo bike storage in the bike shed. Two questions I have. What is the type of parking that's going to be on the north side of Lake Street, where the Hawkins garage curb cut currently is? As JT pointed out, this is where the street is too narrow to be able to pull cars out correctly. And oftentimes if there's cars on both sides, especially in the winter, a single car can't even get through, never mind two. So be curious from the planning team about what the plan is for that. I'm happy to see the integration with the park for 346 Somerville Ave. And my last question is around the transformer box that I think has to come in here. At previous projects, these have kind of been afterthoughts and then placed forever. And I'm curious where this will be, if this is planned a priori on this project, or if it's going to come in after the fact wherever there's space, which oftentimes is at sidewalk level, which I think here would be a real shame. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me do a quick scroll to see if there's anybody else with their hand raised for this portion of testimony. Going once, going twice. I'm closing that portion of the public hearing, and I will open up testimony for folks that want to speak in opposition of the application or otherwise express concern. If you'd like to do that, please raise your hand and I'll call on you in the order in which I see. Going once. Going twice. One more scroll through the list, seeing none. I will close that portion of the public hearing and open it up to discussion by members of the planning board. I do have some comments and some questions for the applicant. I do want to know a few things. One, have you considered having, because the thing that kind of concerned me a little bit was when Councilor Scott indicated there hasn't been a neighborhood meeting since 2019, particularly after we've changed the zoning and a new style of building has been proposed. Even though that's not necessarily required, that's certainly something that we as a board like to see, just to make sure that concerns of the neighborhood, because there are only a few folks that spoke tonight, and there's going to be a pretty significant building in that neighborhood. They might not know that such a significant change has been made and proposed for that site in the last 2 years. So I would suggest that the applicant have a neighborhood meeting just to make sure that everybody is aware of the changes that have been made for this application. Just because you weren't necessarily on the abutters notification list doesn't mean that this proposal won't impact you in your neighborhood. So I would like to ask the applicant to, before the board votes on this, to work with the councilor to schedule a neighborhood meeting, just so everybody is aware of what the application is that's going to be in their neighborhood. That's one. Two, has the applicant gone to the, and I'm going to say it wrong, I don't know the new terminology, the design review committee for input on the design and the materials that are going to be used on the building as proposed to this board?
Oh, I can't speak for the planning department. This is Peter Quinn. Perhaps Dan Hartman could, if he's on this call tonight, he could talk about regulations.
Dan, have they been to the DRC? And if so, what do the DRC say?
They have not been to the UDC because the UDC was not constituted at the time of their application. So we were advised by the city solicitor's office that we needed to respect their constitutional due process rights, despite the fact that we had not yet appointed the new Urban Design Commission. And so we advanced their application.
I would ask, and I would strongly suggest, as one member of the planning board, that you do go before the UDC, then. And I'll tell you why. A couple of reasons. One, I saw on the plans that you're suggesting to use brick or veneer. I don't know how many of you have been before this board when I've been a member of it over the last several years. I don't vote on projects that include brick or veneer, particularly on the street level. It's ugly. It's something that I think befits a building in a prominent location that's a neighborhood building on street level that people are going to be walking next to. It looks fake and it looks bad. So that in any sense needs to be changed. The rest of the building itself is generally fine. The exterior just doesn't look very good. It looks generic. I don't like the way it looks. I think it looks like it could be in any random suburb in middle America that's next to a mall. It doesn't look like something that works well in Somerville, particularly in that neighborhood. The concept of the building is fine to me, and I like it. I like some of the other aspects of it. Honestly, the way it looks isn't appealing to me, at least as one member. And I would like to get the opinion of the design review committee or whatever it's called now under the new zoning, because I'd like this building to be beautiful. I think it can be. I think it right now just looks like a white brick, like a cinder block, right, with a couple of bays. Not to say that the building itself is not good, but the visual attraction of the building I don't think is there and is what the neighborhood should have to deal with for the next 100 years. So what I'd like to do is have it be re-reviewed or reviewed by the urban design folks, and I'd like to see at least a new exterior of that building. I don't think it's an attractive building by any sense. And please do not come to this board with brick and veneer. That's not gonna fly. You're gonna get a no vote out of me 10 times out of 10. Particularly when it's on the first floor. Yes.
Yeah, so when I use the phrase brick veneer, I'm talking about a full brick, not a thin brick. I think that's what you're referring to. I think we're on the same page.
So I get concerned because what's written on the plan is not what you're describing to me. I think the term that we're looking for is full width true brick.
Full bed brick. Yeah, that's what we're using.
Yep, that's what we expect, and that's what I want to see on the plan. I don't want to see the word veneer because I don't want there to be any confusion as to what it is that this board will expect to be on there. There is already a dispute that I've got with a different project that we thought was going to be the full width true brick, and they put on veneer and said, hey, it's real brick, and no, it's not. And everybody who's seen that building knows that it's not. So I want to make sure that there is no confusion as to the expectations that I've got, materials that are going to be used on this building. I also do think it would benefit from a review from the design committee, because I don't think it's an attractive building from the exterior. So those are the comments that I've got at this point. I do see in the staff memorandum, and it's been raised by the counselor and by other folks, that we ought to, and I agree with them, add a condition that the applicant will work with the city to improve the intersection there, and whether that's going to include bump outs and a raised street is something that I think can be worked out. I think that probably makes sense. But it's something that the planning board should include as a condition to this application. It's within our purview to do so, and it would further enhance the neighborhood and the experience of folks who live and use that area. So those are the comments that I've got at this time. Who else wants to talk? And then
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to make just a couple of observations and questions, and I'll just try to get them all out on the table in brief. One is I wanted to say, I think that the proposal in some ways is a bit of I think the term is like pressure test of our Somerville zoning ordinance. And I mean, I'll say, by and large, I'm relatively pleased with kind of like what's come out of this. I mean, for all of the work that went into the Somerville, the new zoning ordinance, I think that this gets really close to what the ordinance asks for. And my hope is as this, more and more applicants, work with it and we find things that need to be tweaked, that the process will continue to kind of go faster and less bogged down in details that I think the zoning does a pretty good job of being explicit about. I share the chair's concern that my one hesitation when I looked at this was, I'm not a design professional, and I had the pleasure of getting reacquainted with the Urban Design Commission by sitting in on a meeting recently. And they are just such an impressive group of people. And I think that this project would benefit from a review by them. I mean, it's in an MR5 district. And I think that, I would certainly feel more comfortable if they had a chance to look at this and give it its review. And because of my kind of, I was looking at it and trying to figure out what is it about this that's giving me this pause, and I was worried, frankly, that, maybe it won't go before the UDC. I went and looked at the Somerville zoning ordinance around sort of the design standards for the MR5, apartment building types. And one thing stood out to me, and I'm not sure that the plan as proposed conforms to, and that in the Somerville zoning ordinance, believe it or not, it states that any building in an MR5 district with a facade of greater than 100 feet in width, now I'm quoting from it on page 186, must be divided vertically as two or more separate and distinct facades of differing architectural treatment so that the building appears to be multiple buildings. I guess, a question for staff is what I am reading applicable to the project that is being proposed in front of us. So I guess that's a question for staff. I think that's my only question, and those are my comments thus far. Thank you.
Okay. I saw Amelia next. You still would like to speak? John, are you raising your hand that you want to speak after? Okay.
Thank you. I certainly came to this meeting prepared to voice many of the same concerns that the chair and that Rob have voiced with respect to the design. I was hoping to see a UDC report that sort of would lay out how the building responds to the design criteria laid out for the MR5 district, because as someone with some architectural background, but certainly not an architect, I was struggling to articulate the ways in which I feel that it's so not contextual. And I think Mike put his finger on it well in saying that it just feels a bit generic, and I would frame that as sort of not responding to the neighborhood context. There's a lot of architectural character in the Union Square neighborhood, and I think this building has the opportunity to really stand out and respond to that in a way that would be something substantial. And I actually looked at the plans that were put in front of the ZBA during an earlier iteration in February or March of last year, and felt that that plan set, despite being a story taller, actually presented as a much less massive building because it had so much more articulation and detail. And I understand that some of that, I'm trying to anticipate the pushback here, and I would anticipate that some of that is because as a passive house building, there has to be somewhat less fenestration. But I feel strongly that there is a level of architectural detail that would push this building into a more contextual place while still allowing it to not negatively impact that passive house design. And I feel fortunate that we have the UDC now fully comprised as a body of professionals who can give more specific guidance to that end. So I would strongly back the chair's thought about us going through that process before coming back to us. I would also just like to follow up on a comment made by Councillor Scott about loading and how both pedestrian rideshare and loading and trash pickups and what have you will happen for this building, just to better understand the flow of traffic on Hawkins and Lake with this new higher density building in this area. I don't expect an issue. I just appreciate the explanation.
That's something that I should respond to now. I would need to refer to the drawings again, so they could allow me to share my screen.
Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. We're just having a tiny bit of technical difficulty making Ms. Quinn a presenter again, so just bear with me for a second.
We'll come back to it too.
That's fine.
Here we go. All right. Yes, the passive house does limit the amount of window that you're allowed. We pushed it pretty far. That's not really answering the question at hand, but I just do want to say that. So Hawkins Street, as it works right now, you know, is got parking on both sides and is fairly tight. We know that. And to JT's point, we had actually proposed reshaping the sidewalk on city property to create a drop off, and then have the sidewalk exclusively on the applicant's property. That was something that you know was a concept that we wanted to put out there to the neighborhood. It's something we'd like to see, and we may end up being able to do that in this area. But I think it's got to be something that's part of the whole plan to, you know, redo these street curbs and create the crossings. This is left over from our original plan, this crossing and raised intersection here. So this is, you know, something that we can't resolve tonight, I think. There was another question as well about trash and like. So you know, we have a trash room with compactors. It's kind of funny like drawing. Bear with me a second. So we have these are actually you know, have compactors in them directly with chutes upstairs that go right into this. So we would be able to bring out the trash containers out to the street at the scheduled time. They can park here on the side temporarily in order to meet that moment when they come. Also, you can see in this drawing, there is an electric vault placed in our part of the sidewalk that is all underground. So that is already planned into this process, into this plan. We will not have a transformer that will be, you know, on grade with a, you know, on-grade transformer, as you see in other developments. Over on this side, where we have that, so what is being referred to by JT and others is that there is a piece of land that is actually on the neighboring property, but it's reserved as a right of way for our lot. So we have proposed to you know, finish it with these grass and paver strips. This is to be used for emergency access, for moving on a scheduled basis, so that somebody can get in there and leave a small moving truck and come in to the building on the secondary entry. But it's not intended to be a regular parking space at all. So it would just be used on a temporary basis. I think with that, I may have answered all the questions that have accumulated. I've already said that the brick is full bed.
Thank you for the clarification. I think in many or all technical aspects, this is a really fantastic project. So I'm very excited to see it go through these last few steps and move forward. Thank you.
Amelia, did you have any other comments or questions before I see if there's anyone else on had some questions? I just want to make sure that I don't cut anybody off. Okay, I just want to make sure I don't cut anybody off before I move on. So, Jahan, you had some questions.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to reiterate the importance of having another neighborhood meeting just to give the neighbors the opportunity to voice their concerns and also asking further questions. I'm generally appreciative of all the hard work that's gone into bringing this project forward. And I think overall, I noticed that there were areas where I was wondering if Mr. Quinn can perhaps speak to. I know that the living room is going to be a space that may be available for the community, the neighborhood to use. I think I heard from Councilor Scott regarding the transit timings being posted in the lobby. I'd love to hear if there are any other areas that may be considered with respect to this project to bring greater connectivity, whether it's from a transit perspective or from a neighborhood integration perspective that Mr. Quinn would like to speak about. I heard tidbits. I'd love to see if there's anything else that may be considered by this board as well as the listeners to this meeting.
Yeah, I'll speak on that. Yeah, so we actually entered into an agreement with the mobility department that has extensive aspects to it. I don't have it in front of me tonight, and it does have to be fleshed out in the next stage. If we're fortunate enough to receive a special permit at some point from you folks, we would move into a building permit application at some point. And in that, all the details of the kinds of things like transit benefits that you would provide to new tenants, the screen, the possibly ride share or bike share. We have to provide capacity for that with a couple of parking spaces near the garage entry. And there's a lot of small details, and I think they're actually fairly enlightened. In terms of when you look at the whole package of them, they can really take a big dent out of car usage or single user car usage. We would like to, shape the front of the building to have a good drop-off point, because we know that a lot of the residents here will be using, ride share type capacity, which such as Lyft or Uber, and to make that easy, as well as people having, we're seeing a kind of explosion of people having packages delivered. So we don't want to be blocking the road. This is just something we have to work out with the city in terms of how that curb is shaped in order to make that happen. But we want the building to work well. And, most likely going to be a rental building, and it's got to work.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Quinn. Mr. Chair, this is Scott Zink, the applicant. May I jump in here?
Yes, please.
So in response to your question and Jahan's question about the neighborhood meeting, just to give some context, we've been working very closely with the neighborhood since the middle of 2018. Mr. Alex Frieden, who spoke earlier, was heavily involved. Seth Hoffman, who lives in Olive Square, both heavily involved, and they're part of the Lake Street neighborhood group. JT Scott, we've met with multiple times. So what I want to say is, I think by any measure, the 6-story building that we had presented over a year ago is vastly improved by the 5-story building that we have tonight. So obviously, we have a shorter building. We've got improved setbacks. We've got more landscaping. So I think like all of their major neighborhood concerns are only improved upon by this presentation that Peter gave tonight. Also kind of reinforced, working with the planning staff, they did inform us that, a new application, this is on the same application. We've satisfied our requirements from a technical perspective. And again, the communication has been open the entire time. When we did go in front of the zoning board, we had full support from the neighborhood. So I just want to give you that, real context of why we felt comfortable coming here tonight without additional neighborhood meetings.
That's,
and Mr. Chair, yep, sorry, go ahead.
That may be fine, Mr. Zink. I will tell you that you're not escaping this board without an additional neighborhood meeting. So I do hope that everything that you've said bears out to be true, but you ain't getting away with not having another neighborhood meeting within the last 2 years after we've changed the zoning. So I just wanted to put you on notice of that.
I guess that is what it is. I guess it's sort of not what we were informed of from the planning staff, but if we technically have to do it, then we have to do it. I just will say we've been working at this for over 3 years, and just the idea of more process is just kind of a nightmare for us. It's just
I'm going to take a little bit of an objection to having a neighborhood meeting that you expect to go well to be an excessive burden and additional process before you move forward. I don't take kindly to that insinuation, and I disagree with it. So I would caution describing involving the neighbors who will be living next to your project for the foreseeable future as a burden. I'm just going to advise you as to that. So
yeah, I meant that with no disrespect. I'm sorry about that. I'm just trying to give some context of how we got here.
I understand it's been a lengthy process, but we can wait a few weeks to make sure that the neighborhood is at least aware of what's going on. This is not something that was unique to my concern. This was shared by a number of members on this board, and something that was perfectly addressed by Councilor Scott. So this is not out of nowhere. So is there anybody else on the board? Did you have anything else to add at this time? I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, your other comment was about the brick base.
Yeah.
Just kind of, I guess it's more of a funny story. I'm doing a project down the street on 65 Bow Street. And that's actually a passive house as well. We did get that approved, showing it's called Equitone. It's a fiber cement base along the retail, which meets the street. The planning staff actually post special permit required us to change it to thin brick, just as a FYI.
That is, did that come before this board?
That was through a different board. I'm just wanted to
Through
bring
a
that up.
different board.
Just a design, kind of question.
I will tell you, had I been on that other board, I would have voted against change. You are before this board, and I will tell you how this board has historically voted and what we have historically stood for. So going forward, I just wanted to put you again on notice of the fact that we don't accept thin brick, particularly on street level. So is there anything else right now?
That's it. Thank you.
Is there anybody else that would like to make any questions or ask any questions or make any comments in regard to the application at this time before we move to close out this evening's discussion on Hawkins Street? Okay. Seeing none, what I think it does make sense to do, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, before we reconvene on this application, I believe it makes sense for the planning board to formally move to require a neighborhood meeting and to require that the applicant meet with the UDC, because that seems to be the will of at least the majority of folks that that have spoken this evening. Sam, go for it.
I just want to clarify potentially with staff that we are not imposing requirements that are beyond our technical authority to impose. I understand that we can make certain requests of the applicant, but particularly given the comment about due process raised earlier, I wouldn't want to do something that we are not technically allowed to make a specific requirement of moving forward.
So it is my understanding, and I'd like staff's opinion on this, is staff could not have required them to do that. Board in its purview can. But I'd like Dan or Rebecca's opinion on my interpretation.
Hello, Mr. Chair. This is Dan Bartman, Senior Planner. I know that requesting another design review is written into your rules. So you were definitely allowed to do that. And we were told an analogy to think about is that the staff is not the judge, and that the judge can require things, and that the staff functions like a clerk, and we are not allowed to interfere with their due process rights. For instance, the UDC not being constituted at that point in time. But to think of yourself, you are a quasi-judicial body and acting as a judge. I believe that statement is correct. I'm certain that you could take this vote, and if we learned otherwise from the city solicitor, we could proceed accordingly. But I know for a fact it's written into your rules that you're allowed to ask the applicant to come back for design review at the very least.
That satisfies my concern. Thank you, Dan.
Mr. Chair, may I ask another question for clarification?
Yeah, of course.
For a neighborhood meeting, could staff remind us how noticing is typically done for neighborhood meetings? Because I also would imagine that there's been some turnover between mid-2018 and the present time in a neighborhood with so many renters, and would like to make sure that we're noticing an updated list of abutters and people in that area.
Are you suggesting the Somerville has turnover?
Mr. Chair, Dan Bartman again. The Article 15 has some notification requirements for neighborhood meetings. It requires mailing notice to a number of parties, including everyone in 300 feet, but also some best efforts about hand delivering flyers to renters and posting flyers in nearby neighborhood businesses. So there are notification requirements for neighborhood meetings.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Anybody else before I move forward in moving to obligate the applicants to these two different points? Seeing none, I'm going to make a motion to obligate the applicant to meet with UDC and also to hold a neighborhood meeting coordinated with the ward council, if possible, before they come before this board again with potentially amended plans. So that is the motion made by the chair, seconded by the clerk. Roll call vote. The chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Amelia votes aye.
John votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
Thank you all. It's a unanimous vote for the applicant. Thank you for your presentation tonight. Look forward to seeing you again after you have met those obligations.
Thank you. Night.
Mr. Quinn may want to, Mr. Quinn, are you, okay. Let me go on to the next item on our agenda before I forget which one it is. 152 to 158 Broadway. So I would invite the applicant and the applicant's representative to be unmuted and to stop their application.
Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. I am unmuting Attorney Richard DiGirolamo, who is the attorney for the project, and then I will unmute the other team members. I believe that the presenter will be Michael LeBlanc. Mr. LeBlanc, could you please use the raise hand feature if that's correct? Thank you very much.
Okay.
Mr. DiGirolamo, you are self-muted.
Hi, I'm sorry. Can the board hear me?
Rich, before you go, can the board hear me as well?
Yes, we can hear you both.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you see my screen? I'm sorry, Rich. I just wanted to. And is it does it show like the title slide with 152, 158 Broadway on it? No.
It shows a ton of icons on a desktop that's stressing me out.
Oh, all right. Hold on. I think I might need to.
Also, okay.
Do you? Let me know if you see it now.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, Rich. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Rich DiGirolamo, 424 Broadway, Somerville, on behalf of the applicant, Broadway Investments Realty LLC. They are the owner of the two mixed-use properties located at 154 and 156 Broadway, adjacent sites. Broadway, as you know, is a pedestrian street. The two properties, which are located in an MR5 zoning district, would be demolished to make way for a 5-story net zero general building type housing, 45 dwelling units, and approximately 4,600 square feet of ground floor commercial space, which includes approximately 400 square feet of outdoor patio. 9 of the units would be inclusionary. The site, which is located just outside of the transit zone, is not proposing any parking. The size of the units, in about 40 of these units, Mr. Chairman, are studios. We believe will greatly diminish car ownership of the residents of this building. And I know Steve Siragusa, who's part of the team who will be presenting shortly, will provide some empirical evidence in that regard. The building is intended to be a rental building. The proposal does provide a total of 58 long-term and short-term bicycle parking spaces. The project has had extensive neighborhood input. There have been 2 neighborhood meetings, both sponsored by Councilor McLaughlin and an appearance before the Urban Design Commission, who approved the design and the site. The proposal requires 2 special permits, one for the use, household living, the other for the relief from parking. Additionally, we are requiring site plan approval. Mr. Chairman, our presentation this evening will be by PowerPoint. The PowerPoint will touch upon the zoning criteria needed for your board to make findings on the special permits and on site plan review. At this time, I'd like to introduce the team who will be presenting. Michael LeBlanc, who you just heard from a couple of minutes ago from UTL Architects, Steve Siragusa from Design Consultants, who is our traffic engineer, and Michael D'Angelo from MDLA, who is our landscape architect. And with your permission, Mr. Chairman, at this point, I'd like to turn things over to Michael LeBlanc, who will begin the PowerPoint. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. And thank you to the members of the board, the planning staff who's here tonight, and in particular to the neighbors who have to, attend these meetings late at night, and it keeps them from their family. So we really do appreciate everyone's time on this. And I also wanted to kind of compliment the new zoning for a bunch of reasons, but we think that some of what's happening here, and you saw it in the last project in some ways, and I think you'll see it in our project, is that that many of the incentives or the carrots built into this zoning incentivize developers to be, you know, building passive house buildings and net zero ready buildings and LEED Gold buildings. And, you know, we think this is a really positive impact, or it will have one on the city in general. And, you know, what we love about this one is, you know, we're doing lots of passive house buildings right now. But this particular client and this particular builder have both gotten themselves or gotten passive house certified. And, you know, really it's a tribute to the policy when you know, we see things like that happening, when you know, and have done so, I think, with a lot of interest and gusto, and it might not have happened otherwise. So we think that's, you know, really terrific. I just want to quickly get into, we'll quickly address what we think is well, one of our special permits, which we're going to be looking for no parking here. You know, we did a pretty extensive study of this neighborhood. I don't need to, you know, tell you about the neighborhood. You all know it really well, I'm sure. But you know, we are just on that brink of being half a mile from the T station. We'll show you exactly where we are relative to the walk zone. But we also have within, you know, very short distance, within a few hundred feet, 4 different bus lines. There's, you know, grocery stores, post office, convenience stores, takeouts, bars, restaurants, shopping, and park space, all very close by to this site. It's an imminently walkable site. And we think also as a site which is designated in the pedestrian zone, you know, one that we think is going to be a sort of great place to live, you know, without a vehicle. I'm going to hand it over to Steve to talk a little bit about a little more of the parking and the transit issues.
All right, can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Good evening. My name is Steve Saragusa. I'm with Design Consultants. We're at 120 Middlesex Ave in Somerville. So as Rich and Michael were both saying, we're located just adjacent to that 0.5 mile transit area, which would be the Sullivan Square Walkshed. And, you know, if within that area, as you guys are aware, you know, we wouldn't need any parking required on site if we are in that transit area. So that is what we're proposing. Next slide, please. So again, as Michael was saying, we're located along a pedestrian street, which connects directly to Sullivan Square, and as well as Central Broadway. There's 4 bus routes within 100 feet of the site, and 4 additional routes within a half a mile of the site. We're closing a curb cut, as you'll see on the next slide as well. And what that does, it's desirable, you know, in this zone, in this district, the MR5 district, that no new developments will have a curb cut along a designated pedestrian street. So what we're proposing to do is close that double curb cut, which is 22 feet wide now, that serves 2 separate driveways. And what we're going to do is create an additional loading zone along Broadway. I know that that's a concern. We want, you know, pickup drop-offs for Uber, Lyfts, deliveries, and not having on-site parking. So what this does is we will not be getting rid of any of the on-street parking along Broadway. There will still be 4, I believe, 4 parking spaces, metered parking spaces along Broadway. We'll just be shifting them west towards McGrath Highway and creating a 30-foot loading zone along Broadway at the corner of Rush Street to accommodate all of those extra trips that we know are going to happen. So there's no on-site parking, but you know, it's expected that there's still going to be vehicle trips to the site, whether it's move in, move out, ride shares, food deliveries, things like that. So we work directly with the mobility department to come up with this design. They have approved this design through the mobility management plan that we put together. So it's already been vetted with the mobility department. And so we think this is a a good compromise to keep all the on-street parking, but to really be able to accommodate all of those vehicle trips that are inevitable to the site. To hit on a few more points that we've went through the mobility management plan, as I had mentioned, you know, this site is going to be geared towards a lot of younger professionals. There have been studies done that show that young professionals are about 30% less likely to own a vehicle now as compared to about 20 years ago. So we think that although this is, you know, just outside of that transit walk shed, it really is going to lend itself to, you know, people who don't drive. And you'll see this in a few other slides. We have a lot of bicycle parking, as Richard mentioned. I believe there's 47 long-term bicycle parking spaces and 11 or 12 short-term, so it's more than what zoning requires. So I think we do a really good job there of accommodating, you know, people who want to live here but don't own a car. So we estimate that approximately going to be about 21 vehicle trips during the weekday AM peak hour and 18 vehicle trips during the PM peak hour. And so we went through that process, but we also did not take any credit for trips that are going to the site currently, which will consisting of a residential building, a laundromat, and an office building. So if we did account for those as well, we feel like the increase in trips to the site would be pretty minimal. And so to combat that, we had this additional loading zone, as I had mentioned, but we've also committed to a lot of transportation demand management measures, as we've outlined in the mobility management plan, that the director of mobility has signed off on. Again, that was a little bit of a back and forth with the mobility department and a little bit of a vetting process. And in the end, they were satisfied with what we were presenting to them, and they signed off on it. So things like transit schedules, local maps, Blue Bike and rideshare information, things like that to make people more informed and be more comfortable in the area, you know, not having a vehicle. So that is a lot of the mobility and traffic work that we went through, and a little bit about that. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions at the end.
So if I could clarify, I believe there's 8 spots there, not 4. But I think Steve's point is that we're not losing any spaces here. We're simply reshuffling them towards McGrath and providing this kind of Uber Amazon pickup drop off. So anyway, thanks Steve. That was super helpful. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the design of the project. You know, we are in an MR5 zone, and so the project meets all the dimensional regulations and design guidelines for the MR5 zone, as well as the pedestrian district. I did want to clarify, because it came up in the last meeting. We've had 2 meetings with the neighborhood. One of those was in July. We then subsequently had an August meeting with the UDC, and then we had a second meeting with the neighborhood in September. And our UDC meeting went, we thought really well, and they were super happy, I think, with the design of the building. But just to kind of clarify a few things there, when I say it meets the design guidelines for MR5, this includes things like the ground floor with active and engaging uses, and cadence of entries along the sidewalk, which enhance that pedestrian experience. The body of the building, which includes materials that reference the existing neighborhood and context, and a fenestration that not only is promoting energy conservation, as Rich said, we're going to be Passive House certified, zero net ready, but also doing that while creating a composition which we think is dynamic and really interesting, and has deep windows, and the way sunlight will rake across this facade during the course of the day, we think will be really quite beautiful. And then a penthouse level that does set back by 10 feet. That's a zoning requirement, but we've kind of further broken that down into some forms which step back even a little bit further. We thought kind of reminiscent of a lot of the, above cornice architecture of Somerville that you see, where there is, a little bit of ad hocism, I guess you'd say, to much of what you see on the roofs of buildings, not just Somerville, but at Cambridge and Boston as well. And we thought this kind of further broke down the scale of the building while creating an interesting roof line, and a little bit more daylight coming down to the street below from there. So that also provides outdoor spaces for those tenants on that floor as well. Looking at the building from the opposite angle, you can see the same general features here. We do have at the ground floor, I'll be clear on this, a full brick facade material being proposed, along with storefront. The body of the building is made out of a through color cementitious panel, which is about the scale of a clapboard. But we are kind of, and I'll go back one for a second here. We're trying to create a bit of a dovetail detail with that board by varying color just a little bit and alternating seams every other row of these. We feel like the scale of this and the texture of it is going to be very reminiscent of a lot of the kind of scale and quality of building of the more historic buildings in the neighborhood. We're certainly doing this in a somewhat contemporary way. And at the very top of the building, at the penthouse level, we are using a metal panel system, which is going to be fairly robust cladding that will, probably be a recessive light to medium warm gray, and one which doesn't create a kind of heavy presence on top of the building. Just to quickly lay out or go through the ground floor plan. We've got 4,200 plus or minus square feet of retail on the right-hand side of the plan. At the far right, we have one of our egress stairs that comes down. The retail will have outdoor space at the back. When Michael, our landscape architect, goes through his presentation, you'll see that. And then on the left side of the plan are the spaces which are supporting the residential uses. So there's an office which is there for maintenance and management of the building. We've got our lobby, kind of center of the building. We've got a kind of really great amenity for bikers. We do, or bicyclists. We think this building will have a real culture of bikes to it. So we've got a bike lounge, which also has indoor and outdoor space that we'll be providing a tool tree and other equipment in order for people to work on their bikes, keep them in tip-top shape. And then one of the things I did want to mention is, and this is a kind of view of the front ground floor facade of the building. And to the far left, you can see there's a transformer room if you look at the plan up above, but then also at the elevation. And one of the comments that UDC made was they liked the solution very much, but they were nervous that Eversource was going to cause us to have to transform this and contort it in ways that would be considered a major change. We've gone through that process with Eversource, and they have accepted our design for this, and in our agreement that it works just fine for them. So we're super happy about that we've been able to kind of maintain what we think is a fairly nice way to hide our transformer, which otherwise really has no other place to go here. So just getting into the unit mix, we have 33 market rate studio units, 7 affordable studio units, 2 affordable 3-bedroom family units, and then 3 one-bed units for a total of 45. These are all going to be really well designed, we think very attractive units that we think they'll be attractive to young professionals and seniors who are wanting to live without roommates. We think this is a really important characteristic of this building, particularly if there's in the event of another quarantine. I can tell you with some of the young architects who live in who work in our office, many of them have roommates that either work at either a restaurant or a grocery store, and that gets them very nervous. They really don't feel comfortable with that, or they have roommates who are also working on Zoom calls all day long, and it makes it very difficult for them to be in the same apartment. So this we feel like is a pretty desirable opportunity for people to be able to live on their own. This also takes the burden off of a lot of the existing family units in the neighborhood, which should be being used for families. And that weren't really designed for a single or a couple to be living in. And then, these types of units are explicitly encouraged in the new zoning in these pedestrian zones, particularly. The upper floors, we're conforming to all of the side yards, front yards, backyards, and then the step backs as we move up and down the building. Just wanted to point out a few things here. You can see how we're laying out the studios. You can see how the 3 beds lay out on the sunny side of the building. And then up on the 4th floor where we have to step back, using that as an opportunity to create a really great amenity space for the building as well as outdoor space. And you'll see that in a little more detail, how that outdoor space lays out from the landscape architect. And with that, I will hand it off to Michael to talk about the landscape. Michael, you there?
I think I'm unmuted now. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mike D'Angelo, landscape architect. So we're opening this slide up. This is the existing conditions, just to show that existing curb cut that we will be closing. And generally speaking, the idea for our landscape design along the streetscape is really to, fill in that curb cut, continue that brick strip you have along the curb, and just continue the streetscape that the city of Somerville has already developed in that area. Next slide, please. So here's the plan. You can see that curb cut has been filled in, and we're matching the existing streetscape treatment. There's some existing benches, some light poles, some existing trees, which are in really good shape that we will definitely try to do our best to maintain and use best practices. Along the building facade, you'll see we have some special pavers. We're using permeable plank pavers. And there's some additional outdoor bike racks in the front there, as well as some movable planters along the front to introduce some green along that facade. In the rear of the building, as Michael mentions, we have this really cool outdoor kind of workstation for bikes on the left side there. So it works nicely with the interior program with the bike storage area. You'll also see a small dog run. You'll see a area that's adjacent to the retail. We're not sure what that retail is going to be, but it's a nice little outdoor space for them back there. And then surrounding the back property line is a row of 47 fastigiate hornbeam trees to really provide a lot of green to that property line edge. Next slide, please. There's some photos. Those are the fastigiate trees, the hornbeams on the bottom. There's some photos of the permeable plank pavers I mentioned at the front of the building and the rear of the building. Next slide, please. This is the 4th floor amenity terrace. So you'll see that the large green area is vegetated green roof, so sedum. There's a couple private decks there on the left. And then to the right, that's the common amenity space that is adjacent to the interior common amenity space. So there's a couple electric grills, there's a dining area, there's a place to sit down, a lounge area, and there's some chaise lounge chairs. So, multiple groups could use that space at one time, given the different programming. Next slide, please. Some images, the flush decking with the sedum vegetated roof, some seating areas, just to give you a sense of the look and feel. Next slide, please. This is the 5th floor. So you'll notice, as Michael said, that top floor is pushed back. So it provides the opportunity for some small deck spaces for those units. Next slide, please. And this is the compiled plan, just to show you the amount of green that we have on this project. It shows all of the green spaces on one sheet. Next slide, please. That's it.
So that's all we have. We wanted to keep it short because we know your time's valuable. And if you have any questions, please let us know.
Thank you. I will have comments and I will have questions. As I have previously said, I try to reserve mine until we've heard public testimony. If members of the board have questions at this time, I would invite you to ask them. Otherwise, I will ask staff if I think Rebecca, this was yours. If you have anything you want to add prior to me opening up public testimony, let us know.
Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. I don't have anything particular to add. I will note that there is a Mr. Tom Lamar who has indicated that he wants to speak by raising his hand, but I think he may be not part of the applicant team, as I understand it.
Okay, well, no, I do not see, I see a question, but that's not part of the record.
Mr. Lamar is confirming that he is a member of the public.
Okay, so what I will do, just so so folks in the audience are aware, what I'll do is public comment, testimony and comment for folks that want to speak in opposition. Then I will close that and I'll open it up to folks that want to speak. I'm sorry, in support first and then in opposition second. But before we do that, Councilor Matt McLaughlin is still in the audience and he's raised his hand. I don't know if Matt wants to speak before the board now, and if he does, I would invite him to be unmuted and to address the planning board.
Councilor, you're unmuted.
Mr. Chair, like you, I would also like to wait until after public testimony.
Okay, thank you, Councilor. Okay, so at this time, what I'd like to do is open up the hearing to anyone in the audience that wants to speak in support of the application. And please raise your hand and I will call on you in the order in which I see you. Right now I see two. I see Tom Lamar and I see Jeff Burns. So I'm going to call on Mr. Burns first, because I saw him first. So if Jeff Burns could please be unmuted. As a reminder, you have a 2-minute time, and please introduce yourself and give your residential address for the record.
Hi, I'm Jeff Burns. I live at 294 Summer Street, and I want to speak in favor of this proposal. Similar to the Hawkins Street proposal, this one leans into the same things that our zoning is set up to encourage. Obviously, being just outside of the half-mile transit-oriented, kind of zoning area, it does need a little extra permission to do what it says to do, which is 0 parking, which goes beyond what the Hawkins Street proposal offers with its small but still somewhat parking. As someone who's lived in Somerville for a while without a car at all, and has lived in the area without a car for almost 20 years, I think this is great. I think there's lots of folks, who would really love to have a place where they go where, hey, I don't have a car, I don't need a car. It's close to a train station, it's close to buses, it's got lots of bike amenities. This is my spot. This is for me. Because there aren't a lot of places that really say that lean into that, and here is one. And on top of that, it's net zero and all the other great things. So I know that requires extra permission, and I really hope that the board, says like, hey, that's the way we got to go. And I invite you all to really lean into that and approve this. So thanks very much, and thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burns. Scrolling down, the only other hand I see raised is Tom Lamar. So I'd like to recognize Mr. Lamar. you could be unmuted and please introduce himself. I'll leave it open for a little while longer for anybody else that wants to raise their hand.
Good evening, Tom Lamar, 17 Cross Street, apartment 3. I live about a block away. I think you can almost see my home in one of the renderings. So where we live, we don't drive either, and the proponent's analysis is pretty consistent with our experience here. Even though it's not quite technically in a designated transit zone, it's a very convenient area to walk to Sullivan, take one of the many bus routes, and with the grocery store and so many local businesses nearby, it really is an unusually convenient place to live without relying on a car and doing a lot of your errands on foot and having transit and biking when you need it. So it's a great neighborhood for that, and I'm glad other people have the opportunity to live in this neighborhood without needing to rely on cars. Some design details, I like the height of this, and I really like having a continuous street wall and closing the curb cuts here. I like having the retail space, and I appreciate that the bicycle parking space is situated in a pretty convenient location where you can easily get your bike out the front door. And I think that if they had to include car parking here, that would really interfere with some of the other parts that make the ground floor uses great here. And so I think the project really benefits from not providing parking here. So I'm a big fan of this project overall. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Lamar. Is there anybody else that wants to speak in support of the application? Please raise your hand. Going once, going twice. I'm going to close that portion of the public hearing and open it up to anyone that wants to speak in opposition or otherwise express concern about the application at 154 Broadway. Please raise your hand if you'd like to be recognized. Going once.
Yeah,
I see. I see Colin Christopherson.
You got it right. Yes.
Yep, Mr. Christopherson, if you're unmuted, so please introduce yourself and give your residential address for the record, please.
Colin Christopherson at 17 Rush Street. Just maybe more of a thing to ponder there. I know we spent years putting together that new zoning plan, 7 years. I just worry about, are you setting some kind of precedence that if you're next to an adjacent property, you can start pulling some of that zoning over there so that the next property can try and do the same thing. So that, if I'm in a residence right behind here, can I do a 5-story residence building? Or if I'm at the next location at 160 Broadway, can they do the same thing and start tweaking the zoning map that you've created? So just something to ponder for the board. I'm not saying that I'm completely against this or completely for that, just kind of bringing that up. But the other item, and if traffic safety says it's okay, I just wonder, sometimes those Amazon vans are pretty tall. If you put it right on the corner of Rush Street there, it's hard to see coming around the corner as you creep out. I'm wondering if it might be a better spot to place that loading. But if traffic safety says this is the best spot for it, then I'm fine with that. That's all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Christopherson. Is there anybody else that wants to speak in opposition or express concern? Please raise your hand now. Going once. Going twice. I've closed that portion of the public hearing, and I would like to recognize Matt McLaughlin, if he'd like to address the planning board, because I know he had expressed an interest in doing so after the close of public testimony. If you would still like to, I would welcome Matt to address the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt McLaughlin, Ward 1 City Council. 2 community meetings were held over this project. There was initial concern about the amount of studio apartments as opposed to 2-bedroom apartments. The developer did add a 3-bedroom apartment that I believe is supposed to be affordable. So that made some residents happy. Others would still prefer less studio apartments. And that's really all I have. People aren't attacking me in the street over this. So That's about as good as it gets sometimes.
The lack of outrage, is sometimes the best way. You can move forward sometimes. I get it. Thank you very much, Councilman Buckland. So I will say this. As public testimony has closed and it's now up to the discussion of the planning board, I'll stop because I feel like Frank Costanza, I've got a lot to say about you people. I'm going to share the concerns that Mr. Christopherson raised. I'm glad he did, because I am the longest serving member on this board. I've been on the board since 2008, and I believe the comprehensive zoning overhaul started to happen around 2011, 12, and it finally got passed a year or so ago. So it's taken quite a long time to get to where we are, and it has had the most involved public process of anything I have been involved in while I was a member on this board. We have had multiple iterations of the overhaul of maps, of what should be placed where, of official studies, of unofficial studies, of neighborhood focus groups, of folks coming to public hearings held by this board with the land use committee, with the Board of Aldermen itself, separate from us. And we have gone through many years and much paper and much study and much involvement with figuring out what parcels fit where in our city and what should be zoned where. Following that process and following the adoption of the comprehensive zoning overhaul in 2019, the end of 19, I think, we had a few parcels come before us again, saying, hey, you got it wrong. It was 4 or 5 or 6 of them at the beginning to middle of 2020, saying, you guys got it wrong. We should have been, zoned, A, we were zoned B, and this board and the council reviewed it and made our decisions accordingly. We've had more time than we should have to figure out where the line should be drawn. And this property falls outside those lines. I think this is the second application, besides the one that we just heard, that came before us under the new zoning, under the MR5 district. For us to say, we're going to pretend that years of public process and years of opportunity to change the lines and figure out what should be zoned where and to what guidelines should just be changed because you're next to the district, I think is a horrendous precedent for this board to set for zero parking. That's why I asked the applicant in the hearing before this one, you're within the transit area and yet you're incorporating parking that you didn't otherwise need to have. The last time this board approved an application for a number of residential units with zero parking was Ilan Sassoon's building on Somerville Avenue. And that building, had it been proposed tonight, would fall with transit area, and we gave them no greater relief than they would have been entitled to under the new zone. This application falls outside of that transit area. Yes, by 1 or 2 parcels, but what if we give it to this guy? What about the guy next door to him? Hey, we're only 2 down. Oh, we're only 3 down. The city knew, and everybody knew where the T-stop was. The T-stop hasn't changed. The bus lines haven't changed. We know where everything is. We've had more expert review on our transit planning than anything that I can recall. The fact that this applicant wants to come before us and say, just pretend we're next door, I think is a horrendous precedent to set. I have not seen, outside of them just wishing they were next door, to justify giving them the relief that they seek in creating zero parking. If they came to us and said, we're required to, have 20 and we want 17, we can talk. What they said they want nothing. They want to pretend that they are next door. They can't. We are well within our discretion to require them to come up with at least some plan for parking. The idea that younger people don't have cars and that people in Somerville don't have cars and don't use cars and want to use bikes, that's not new. That was all contemplated in the multiple years and multiple iterations of the zoning overhaul. We've changed parking requirements throughout the city because of it, because times have changed. And I'm sorry, the lines were drawn for a reason. I'm incredibly hesitant to, and I won't, I will vote against giving this applicant the relief that it seeks today. And I'm not going to talk about the remainder of my concerns in detail tonight, but I am concerned about the top level of the building. It looks like, I understand we're allowed to go up to that height. I think it's incongruous with the rest of the neighborhood. It is it's a building that doesn't really fit in with what else is on that section of Lower Broadway. The top floor looks like a bunch of salt sheds tacked on top of the building. I think if you can and want to go up to that height, which the zoning allows, you can make that look a lot better. That's a secondary concern. My primary concern is the relief that you're seeking regarding parking. I don't think there is any justification within the zoning and the history of the zoning that would give this board a reason to grant you that relief. I would want to see, if you are seeking parking relief, give us something we can work with, because this is above and beyond what I think is a reasonable ask. Because once we give it to you, what's to say the guy next to you isn't going to say the exact same thing? And the guy next to him, we're only 3 down, we're only 4 down, we're only across the street. Without getting too overhanded, we've looked at this for years. We've created the lines for years. We've created the zones for a huge amount of public testimony, public input, expert review, and to just pretend that you're next door and not seek the relief that others did earlier, I guess it would have been last year, to say, you missed us, we really should have been rezoned. You didn't avail yourself of that either. I would not be in support of giving you the relief that you seek in regards to the parking, and that is primary in my concerns. Secondary in the concerns would be the design of the exterior of the building on the top floor, but we need to get over the parking issue before we even get into the details of that as far as this member of the planning board is concerned. So that's where I stand this evening, and I would like to invite other members of the board to raise their questions and concerns now. Sam?
I think I probably disagree with most of what you said, Mr. Chair. I think this is not as simple as someone who wants to who wishes their property were zoned differently. It's different to say I'm in a neighborhood residential, but I wish I was in an MR5. We've seen those applications, maybe not that exact example, but we've seen applications like that over the past several months. To say we're very close to a transit area, we're next to a transit area, the transit area is more about the, it really is proximity based. I will fully admit I was not on this board while the new ordinance was being passed, but the transit area, in my understanding, is much more of a gradient rather than an absolute, this is the line and inside this line is one way and outside this line is another way. It is not black and white like that. It's a gradient. So I do think that this is not equivalent to the other types of zoning changes and zoning discrepancies that we've seen before this board, and that I think we treated with appropriate skepticism. I think this is a very different situation there. So I don't have those same concerns regarding parking. I think that there are, as a resident, a neighbor of this potential site, I think this is the sort of area that is precisely the sort of place that we should encourage fewer cars coming into the community. I think this is the sort of place that is incredibly well suited for this. And if we don't do it here, there aren't many places in our city that are better suited for minimal transportation, for minimal vehicle usage. So I am supportive of that. And I'm also appreciative of, I'm forgetting who made this comment from the public, but that to try to create parking on site would sacrifice other uses. And there are other things about this building that we do really like and appreciate and would not want to sacrifice for the sake of increasing car access to the property. So those are my primary comments. I appreciate Mr. Christopherson's raising the concern. I don't share that concern. And I think there are important ways that this is distinguished from the worst version of that concern, which I think is what you had articulated, Mr. Chair. So I think I'll leave it at that at this point. I also, sorry, I'll add one more thing. I appreciate that this went through the UDC process and that it has gone through a lot of the processes that we had found fault with before, or concerns with from the previous applicant. So I, yeah, wanted to add that as well.
Thank you, Sam, very much. Does anybody else have any comments or questions? Amelia, I see you.
I would tend to agree with Sam's comments in many ways. While I appreciate I'm not sure if this is the right way to frame it, but there are absolutely issues where a zoning adjacency based on would be where I agree with Mike that an adjacency would be a bad precedent to set as a rationale. But in this particular case, I see parking as an amenity that is being provided to many buildings in Somerville for the benefit of their residents, that increases the market, like speaking from a real estate perspective, that just increases the marketability and attractiveness of those buildings to a certain sector of the population. And with this project, as I believe had a voluntary commitment to not provide on-street resident or visitor parking that they addressed up front in the application, if I'm remembering correctly, I don't see this as having a sort of negative externality that spills out into the neighborhood so much as they are making a bet on themselves and where they're positioning themselves in the market. And I don't know that it's, and I would just hesitate to penalize them for taking that stance when it's something that, if it were a project that was proposing no parking but had not taken on that voluntary requirement, I would think differently about.
Thank you. Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll just go through my comments and try to be brief. I guess I would first like to say that I, by and large, I think, again, like the previous applicant, a lot of the particulars and a lot of the goals of the Somerville zoning ordinance, really appear to be kind of lived up to in many ways by what you're proposing. So I do want to commend you for that. I would say on the question of parking, I would be more of the opinion, and I was, while other people were talking, frantically searching around for the transit map just to kind of see that for myself, and I didn't quite get to it. But I do think in this particular case, this is a site that's on a very heavily pedestrian corridor, but also bus corridor that goes, directly to the Orange Line. And so I can be very much persuaded into a zero park building at this particular site. And I certainly can appreciate the concern of, yeah, a slippery slope. And, you know, if this was a parcel that was sort of farther off the beaten path, or just because we happen to be next to something else, we want to import this, you know, adjacency requirement sort of haphazardly, I guess I would be a lot more cautious. But that's at least how I'm viewing the parking issue. On a related point, though, I have a lot of questions about the loading zone, and it could be just my confusion, you know, or maybe Google Maps is out of date. But as best as I can tell from the existing street view, and I think your presentation may have indicated it, I'm not sure, there is an existing loading zone of approximately 15 to 20 feet on the corner of Cross Street and Broadway. And your proposal is suggesting adding, as my understanding, an additional 30-foot loading zone on the other end of the block at the intersection with Rush Street. I guess I'm confused about, so the notion is, or the suggestion is, that there will be 2 loading zones on that block. Is that truly what was intended? I guess I'm curious to know, is there a wisdom to consolidating those at the middle of the block, which would be directly in front of your property? I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion. I think I just need clarification around what the loading zone proposal is. And the reason why I think it's so important is, you know, in a zero park building, there is going to be a lot of loading. There's going to be 45 units. So we know off the bat, you got 45 people who got to move in, plus the Amazon, the UPS, all the delivery trucks, furniture delivery, et cetera. I think it's going to be a really active loading zone. And the chair made reference to the project over at 346 Somerville Ave, which was approved, I believe, last year or the year before. That was also a zero park building. I think that had approximately 96 units. And this board, as a condition or as part of approving that, you know, there was a loading bay that was kind of included as part of that. And I can see the value of a loading bay. You know, this is half that number of units. And so maybe a really healthy loading zone in front of the building or near the building would serve that purpose. I'm totally open to hearing more about that. But I think that the loading and the parking are very much related. And I think we got to get to an answer and a solution on that. Linked to that, and I'm just going to go through my 3 other concerns. You know, I don't know if it's really under our purview, but a single elevator for 45 units that has this much activity, you know, is that sufficient? I don't know. But if people are gumming up the loading zone because they don't, you know, somebody's holding the elevator, you know, I just don't want this to be a loading zone that's essentially occupied all the time because of this building. I mean, it would be nice that it's not completely used 24/7. The next concern, and I'm almost done, is trash. I applaud the interior trash room. I know that is required. I was happy to see that in the zoning. I didn't see that room was accessible by the storefront commercial space. I guess I have an open question then as to where the commercial tenant will be storing their trash and recycling. Rodents is the concern. I'm always looking to make sure that doesn't erupt. And then lastly, you know, I don't have I try not to get into the design stuff, but I don't have a huge objection to the penthouses, the penthouse, the little 4 houses on top. I think they are kind of interesting. I will say, you know, the goal of the zoning often will say something to the effect of, you know, that the upper floor like recedes or is less noticeable or somehow isn't meant to like call attention to the fact. But they very much are calling attention to themselves. You know, and maybe it's lowering the parapet in the front. I mean, you've got the 2-foot parapet plus the additional, you know, height on the peaks. it just, you know, it makes the whole 5th floor look, you know, 4 to 5 feet taller than every other floor. And maybe there's a way to kind of split the middle there. So those are all my comments, and I think it invites probably continued discussion.
May I just add to one of your points about loading, if we are going into that discussion with the applicant? I'm concerned about, as it was described in the initial presentation, the loading where it's currently proposed being too far away from the residential entrance of the building, or from either entrance of the building, to be used. I think there's a degree of loading enforcement that's very challenging, and maybe that will be resolved by the parking spots on the street parking being full. But if you have 45 people, half of whom have ordered takeout, I don't think anyone's parking on the other side of Rush Street to bring that order in. And I would just share the concern about sort of whether the loading is located adequately to service the needs of a building of this density.
Okay, should I respond to any of those, or are there still more questions?
Before you respond, I'd like to make sure that nobody else has any questions or comments that you should be prepared to respond to. And when you have concluded, actually, and Mr. LeBlanc, before you start, Councilor McLaughlin would be available to have 1 or 2 additional comments based on some of the concerns raised by this board. So I would invite him to jump in after the board has made all of its comments, and before you have an opportunity to respond, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, John, did you have any questions at this point? No. Okay. What I'd like to do is invite Councilor McLaughlin to be unmuted if he'd like to address some of the concerns that were raised by members of this board. He's obviously on the ground with neighbors of this project, and would know better than any of us.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add on the subject of parking. Excuse me. I honestly wish more developers were willing to do 0 parking with the condition that the people occupying those buildings would not get off-street parking permits, which should be a provision in this agreement. It was discussed at the community meeting that that's what the compromise would be, is, you know, you're not building parking, but you're not getting parking spots either, and you're not getting a parking pass. So that would alleviate my concern. I do believe it alleviated a lot of people's concerns, not everybody. I don't think parking really brings anything positive to this project from a community standpoint. I think on East Broadway in particular, the less cars cutting onto Broadway, the better, to improve the streetscape that we're trying to build here. And I would add that there's another project that is within the transit zone. It's as close to transit as possible, and they're insistent on building parking despite community objections. They're not willing to sacrifice the marketability of their site with on-site parking. I feel like this one is willing to. I feel like this is more of a sacrifice than it is a offer, because there will be people who have cars who won't want to live here. So I hope that, I don't want to set a precedent. I know that the zoning was just passed, but the zoning is also changing already as we speak. As far as I'm concerned, if anybody wanted to build on East Broadway and is willing to sacrifice parking passes in exchange for no parking, I'm generally supportive of that.
Thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate your comments. I would invite Mr. LeBlanc to respond to some of the questions, or any of the questions and the comments that were made by the board at this time.
Sure,
There's going to be kind of a little bit of a back and forth too, just so you're prepared.
That would be best. Yeah, it would be much
If
easier.
anybody else on the team has something that they feel like is appropriate to add, they can do that too, obviously.
Okay, so I guess I would first want to address the very first issue that was raised also by one of the members of the public. And I think I would try to, well, I would concur with what Sam, the way Sam characterized this. This is not saying we want to be next door, so give us their zoning. The zoning, and I think Rebecca could speak probably a lot more eloquently to this than I can, but the zoning explicitly allows for this provision if you do a traffic study, an analysis of the walkability of the neighborhood, and all of these other things. So that's why the special permit is required. So the zoning is set up to allow for this. This is not us trying to say we wish we were somewhere else. This is us presenting our case for why we think this is the best way for this project to be proposed, and that it is something which is allowed for by special permit rather than a variance in the zoning, which would be a very different thing. And I agree that it would be a dangerous precedent to say that the site next door is an MR3, but we're right next to an MR5, so we want that zoning. That would be a completely different story. So I mean, I hope that at least gives you a little bit more comfort in the notion that this would be precedent setting, because I don't think it is. I'd also concur that that if we had to provide a double curb cut here on this what's otherwise becoming a very robust pedestrian active street, that would be very much in opposition to what the zoning is actually asking for here. Curb cuts happen to be prohibited on pedestrian districts and pedestrian streets, which this is designated as that. And so if we were going to provide a curb cut here, that would essentially be prohibited by your zoning, but at the same time, the zoning says that it's base level that we're supposed to have parking here. So those two things are a little bit in conflict. We feel like with the parking study we did and the traffic study, that we feel really confident that this is a good use of this special permit for this particular site, and one that also reinforces the applicability of this being an important pedestrian way in enhancing that pedestrian experience. I'm trying to think if there was something else on that issue. I think that, well, why don't we hit the loading, because that was part of the, I think they're part and parcel of the same discussion. I would also, go back to saying that, the zoning does prohibit curb cuts here. To create a curb cut for for a loading area here, I think would be very much counter to the active and engaging use on the first floor, and would also create another curb cut and another impediment. So to that, I would say also that we expect there to be about 15 to 17 move-in, move-outs during the course of a year. Our client, who has another project very similar to this one, and he sees approximately 30 to 35% turnover each year. And so we don't see this as a heavy use for this loading area for lots of move in and move out. We do think that the nature of most of these units are that people will generally move in with their own vehicles or with a friend's vehicle, or with a very small U-Haul that they might have rented, and that you're never going to see like big massive trucks coming in here to use this loading area. We've intentionally taken the area that we've got, and we've pushed it back 20 feet from the intersection, which I think will help with the visibility if someone pulls out there. So we feel like that's been mitigated reasonably well. And then just to try to answer the question of the two, and can you still see my screen or not at this point?
No, it would be great if we could see that diagram again.
How would I do that? Does Rebecca need to?
Yes, this is Rebecca speaking. Hold on just a second.
Yeah. Let's see if I can find that. I should be able to. Okay, so the question about there being two different loading areas on this particular block, we do feel like as neighborhoods like this evolve, with the number of packages that do come from Amazon, or other types of places, whether it's grocery stores or whatever, there is a real need for these types of pickup and drop offs here, whether it's Uber, Amazon, or whatever. The one that's existing at the other corner we think is great. We proposed having our drop off or our loading area right in front of the building to begin with, approximately where the double curb cut currently resides. Having talked through that with the mobility group at the city, they felt like for a couple of reasons that this is a better proposed location, where it isn't necessarily dedicated to our building, but it really is kind of a public amenity. So if someone on the other side of Rush Street, let's say, is getting a package or getting dropped off, that they're also using this. This also seemed to be the best way that, as you can see, how this is ghosted in, that a vehicle would come across the parking lane and then be able to back up without backing across the parking lane. Whereas when we're in the middle of the block, a vehicle would have to back across that bicycle lane, and both we and the mobility team at the city felt like that was not a particularly safe condition. So this ability to be backing up while not crossing that bike path seemed really favorable to them, and it also allowed for that to happen with more ease, because it was right at the corner of the block. So I think I'm hoping that answers the questions on those two issues. But let me know if I didn't.
Thank you, Blank, for addressing those. What I'd also like you to address, because it wasn't raised by members of this board, but it was raised by Councilor McLaughlin. As I recall, it was a concern of the neighborhood following some neighborhood meetings, was the unit size makeup of this building. If I recall, it was the consensus of the neighborhood, or at least a concern of members of the neighborhood, as relayed by Mr. McLaughlin, that there were too many studio apartments and not enough family-sized or slightly bigger buildings or units rather in this site. It's something that I also share, and I'm glad that he raised it as a concern that was something that certain neighbors had brought up at neighborhood meetings, and I'd like you to be able to address that and tell me the feasibility of changing at least some of them over to address some of the neighbors' concerns. Now, my concerns relative to parking, I've been on this board for quite a while. I don't always get what I want, and I recognize that every member on this board has a valid opinion that I respect, and the counselor also disagrees with me. So it's not going to be necessarily a sticking point to me. But if we do move forward in voting on this application, which won't be tonight, by the way, because I, as one member, am going to need some additional time to think about this, and maybe have you come back with a revised plan or so, depending on how you respond to the concern on unit makeup, is I would, if I'm not going to get you to put parking in, I am going to move that this board require that nobody in the building gets a parking sticker. I think that's a fair trade-off.
Agreed.
I don't like kind of walking back on making a precedent that I think could come back and be less than favorable to this board, but I also respect that this might not be the application to really put my foot down of a reasonable compromise. But I do want to hear about the unit makeup, because that is something that concerned me. There have been a number of properties that have come before this board over the last several years that have been within transit areas, that have been outside of it, that have been, we just want, all studios or all one bedrooms. And one of the many concerns that we've heard as a board, and certain that the council has heard, is that there's not enough either family-sized housing or housing that's going to accommodate more than just one person. There's plenty of studios as there are, and there aren't enough of a variety of unit sizes. So I'd like you to be able to address that for the board this evening right now.
Sure. Yeah, we did one all studios when we started, and we met with the neighborhood, and I think that's where we started to generate some 1 bedrooms and the 3 bedrooms, and I think that was a positive outcome from from the neighborhood meeting. What I would say is this, and I believe it's written in the staff memo to the board that talks about I believe it's 95% of the people looking for apartments in Somerville are either single or they are a couple. And, a vast majority of them are looking for an apartment that they can live in, that they can afford, even if it's a little smaller, and that they can live on their own and they don't need to have a roommate. What happens often in Somerville, and we've seen a lot of this, is that you'll get a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom apartment in one of the, let's say in the more residential housing stock of Somerville, where you might have a triple decker or a 2.5 story house that's broken into apartments, and those apartments are larger and they're great, and those are family style units. And this is a little what I was alluding to when I was talking about the makeup of our units. What frequently happens is that those units are rented sometimes by families, and that's great. But oftentimes, because of the cost of them, they're rented by a series of roommates who are living together. And, in a 2-bedroom, there might be 2 people or even 4 people. In a 3-bedroom, there might be, 3 or even 6 people if they're sharing beds, because they're trying to split costs and reduce their let's face it, the housing costs in Somerville are super high. And so what we find happening frequently are these family designed units, which are already there, which are already an amazing part of the housing stock and the housing mix in Somerville, end up being taken over by a bunch of roommates who are now, maybe they're younger, maybe they're noisier, maybe they're living right above, a family who has kids, and so it creates a somewhat incompatible condition where the family units are being taken up by groups of roommates. This provides an alternative to that, I think, which is really great, which is people who want to live on their own, who want to live in a really well-designed building, will have the ability to do that, and they won't be putting additional pressure on those family style units in the rest of the neighborhood. So by virtue of making these, we feel like it frees up those kinds of units to more families, in the greater neighborhood.
Thank you for your response to that. I don't know if that's, first of all, I don't know if McLaughlin's still online. It doesn't look like he is. I do see Rich DiGiromo's hand raised, and Rich, you're also unmuted. I didn't know if you wanted to address the board because you are unmuted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly, I would like to comment on the parking issue. I think you and I have both been around long enough, Mr. Chairman, to recognize that not too long ago it would be perceived as extremely aggressive to come before your board with a 45-unit project with no parking. Nevertheless, we have been told that the times have changed. Having said that, I think I just want to make 2 points. First off, the first time I spoke to Councilor McLaughlin about this project and not having parking associated with it, the first thing that he said to me was, when and I told him we literally 2 sites away from the end of the 1/2 mile transit zone. We're 2 properties away. The first thing he said to me was, well, I'll entertain it as long as you folks, your residents, understand that we will not allow residents of that building to get parking permits. And I think that staff has eloquently addressed that through one of their conditions. And I think the point that Amelia made earlier is well taken, in that whether you have parking with this first off, this building has to be advertised to resident prospective tenants with no parking. So somebody who comes to this building is going to go through great pains if they own a car, because they're going to have, they're not going to be able to get a resident sticker, which means their only other alternative is they'd have to rent private parking somewhere. And I would suggest to you that there are many other rental alternatives, particularly in this rental market right now, where, you know, it's much easier if you've got a car to rent an apartment that has parking. I think Amelia's point is very well taken, that the risk here really lies with the developer, because if these apartments cannot be rented because it's attracting a clientele that that owns cars, and he can't get folks to walk a half a mile to the Sullivan Station T-stop who happen to live in this building, then the risk is entirely on him. It's certainly not, in my mind, you know, somebody who has other rental options available to them and who owns a car is probably not going to reside at 152, 158 Broadway, where parking is not allowed on site, and city parking is not allowed. So I would just ask you to consider that, Mr. Chairman. But I understand. Trust me, I understand the point. You know, your point well.
Right. And so, Rich, I appreciate your comment, and like I said a few minutes ago, it seems to be kind of my unique concern among members of this board, so it seems, and I do think there are ways to mitigate my concern when it comes to the parking. I don't know if the concern relative to the unit sizes is shared among members of the board. They did raise some other concerns, which I'd like to hear staff's response on issues relative to the loading zone, and whether the explanation by the applicant is sufficient to meet staff's interpretation as well. Because I'd like to be able to make sure that, you know, when we do vote on this, because I'm not quite yet prepared to do so this evening, that it is the best project that we can get to. So I'd like to hear staff's response to some of the issues, some of the responses that Mr. Bond gave, and if staff believes that there are conditions that could be suggested and imposed to better perfect this application, I'd love to hear it.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. To the question of the loading zone specifically, it's definitely a challenging one. I will echo Mr. LeBlanc's note that they worked very closely with the mobility department to develop the mobility division to develop the location and the particular orientation of the loading zones that are being provided. There is a particular challenge for this site as it is a building that fronts onto a pedestrian street, and therefore the facade, the uses that are directly accessed by the facade are limited to 4 particular uses outside of lobbies for upper floor buildings. So a specific loading area located on the facade of this building would be a challenge. Does that answer the specific question? The addition of a loading dock would not be a use that would typically be supported on fronting onto a pedestrian street.
loading zone wasn't my concern, but I'd like to ask, Rob, whose concern it was, whether that addresses your question.
No, that definitely addresses my question, and I by asking it, I wasn't suggesting that I was, wedded or strongly in favor of a loading dock. I was really trying to wrap my head around, the zero parking and the location of the proposed two loading zones that I now understand kind of where they're at. I agree with other comments. It's just a bit challenging. It's a challenging location, and I don't know what the answer is, but I am concerned that we're just going to start seeing Amazon vans double parking in front of this building.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions or concerns on this application tonight? John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is really related to some of the items that Rob has mentioned, but I just want to focus on the retail side, and this is really directed towards staff. As the conversations with mobility occurred, I just wanted to get a confirmation to make sure that the retail, any vehicular traffic associated with the retail space, and we don't know what that may be, but the vehicular traffic that was associated with the retail space was accounted for, and whether the staff can speak to any concerns or any other mitigation items that may have come out.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca Cooper. So through you to Member Habib, I will note that there is an exemption for parking requirements for, I never want to quote numbers, but this does not meet the threshold for requiring parking for retail use of that space.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, wonderful. What I'd like to do,
there were just a couple other comments if you wanted me to address those.
I would welcome you to address anything that you think is important for this board to hear. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I did want to talk about the penthouse because I know it isn't what you would consider the typical design solution. I would say when we went through it with the UDC, they were more than pleased with that particular part of the project, and felt like it was a far superior solution, one that they wouldn't have thought of, and one that they really quite liked. That it gave a sort of breakdown of scale, a breakdown of a hard cornice line at the very top of the building, and they really did quite like the contextual kind of references of it. So I understand that it is something that isn't probably the standard. It isn't the kind of ubiquitous solution that you would see most anywhere, but it was one that the UDC was particularly supportive of and in favor of. Just wanted to make sure we let you know that. I don't think there were any other. I think there was really parking, loading. We talked about unit sizes, and then just those couple of design issues. Was there anything else?
There was not, but it was one that I'm scrolling through your plans now. There was one that I had actually thought. Yeah, there was one that I had thought of and neglected to raise when I spoke earlier. So if you wouldn't mind this concern, as I'm scrolling through your plans right now, I'm sorry. As I'm scrolling through your plans, it doesn't appear as though, and maybe your images can ameliorate my concern, is that the sides of your buildings, front looks like the front looks. The sides of your buildings look particularly plain. that is concerning to me because traditionally this board has requested that all sides of the building that people can see, even if it's in the back of the building, if it faces the highway, for example, looks like something that's not just a blank slate. So my concern is that it just looks like nothing on the sides of the building, particularly when you've got a street in between you and someone else. It's not like the image that you've got up here where you've got one side of the building that's largely obscured by the building next to it on the right. But I'd like exactly. I'd like to see a rendering where at least the sides of the building that people are going to see looks like something that's not just a blank wall. I mean, I don't know if you were intending to put up, lighting or artwork or anything. I mean, I understand that you're not necessarily going to put windows there because I'm not sure what's on that side of the building, but anything that doesn't look just like a blank wall. I meant to raise that earlier, and I'm sorry I didn't at that time. I was kind of scrolling through the application again before we move on from it this evening. And I'd hope that you could address that because things that we had, including buildings that have been built under the new zoning in Union Square, where the backs of the buildings abutted other buildings and other streets, and this board required that the backs of the buildings look like something that weren't just backs of buildings.
Yeah, I understand. I think it's a great comment. It's a condition that we run into frequently, and we struggle with, of course. The reality is our building is built up to a lot line. The windows that you see wrapping the corner there are ones that we're going to require a building code variance to get. We're fairly sure we'll be able to get it because where those windows are located is if they are ever have to be closed over, if the building or the site next door decides to build a similar lot line building, we could close those windows up without creating any code problems for that unit. And so that would be something that would be favorable. So our response to that was to curl those the front facade around the side as much as we could, so that when you're seeing this obliquely as you're driving along or walking along Broadway here, that at least where there's trees and buildings and all that in front of you, you would be seeing that building looking like it's wrapping around the corner. But the reality is that in order for us to do a whole lot more there would probably be unacceptable to the code, to the building code, not the zoning code at this point. And so we do expect that, that like the other side of our building where there's a lot line condition that there is really no space between the buildings, that will be the case here at some point in the not too distant future. But
the concern is, though, it's not now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no guarantee that this, two-family home is going to become a 5-story building in the next 2 years. It might not. And my concern is that it doesn't. Unless you can guarantee me that the side of this building isn't going to be seen, which I don't think you can. I
won't give you that guarantee.
Do we have something in the pipeline? My concern is that you leave an entire side of a building, and particularly the people that live next to this building, with a blank concrete wall. And that, to me, is not something that we should be striving for.
Yeah, let me just try to give a little more detail of what is going on there, because maybe the rendering is I'm not sure if it's showing up on your screen, but so we have turned our primary facade around the corner by about 10 feet. So that was the start. What we have are clapboards on those sides that are more consistent with, say, the clapboards of the house next to us or the one behind. And we were trying to kind of break it up by floor by creating a detail that you can begin to see. Can you see my cursor?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but in a floor by floor kind of articulation of how those different floors are working, and then a change of material to what is a kind of blind standing seam metal panel above. So we do have sort of three different materials here and different floors trying to be composed here. Certainly
do you have any sort of an additional rendering of precisely what that side of the building is going to look like? Because right now the image that I see just looks like concrete slabs, and I've lived in buildings like that, and they're not very.
Yeah, no, there's no concrete on this side. This is going to be a painted clapboard material along this side here. And
what I would ask then, Mr. Lund, is the next time that you come before us in a few weeks, because what I'm going to do is going to ask the record to be left open for written testimony as well. I'd like somebody to be able to give us, if meeting in person, I'd say bring the materials that you intend to use, but
I do have a board at the back here which would show the materials. Hold on. Here we go. Okay, so this is going to be, the brick along the front at the ground floor. This is the Okoskin detail that I was talking about earlier. The composite aluminum panel, which would be just below the windows, and that's a kind of really robust, expensive version of a metal panel that will kind of anchor where the windows are relative to the floors. This is the cementitious clapboards that we'd be using on the sides of the building here, and then up at the very top, this is this standing seam metal roof. So I don't know if that helps at all.
That actually does to me a little bit, because it wasn't apparent with the renderings that you'd shown earlier. And I don't know. It looks like we've got. I think Rob raised his hand. I'd like to hear. I'd like to hear the members' comments as well as staff's on the materiality that's being used, because it's always something that's a concern to me. With guarantee that the building next to you is going to cover that up in 2 years.
Yeah, I would just say, on this very point, and I don't know, Mr. LeBlanc, or who's kind of in charge of the slides, but if you could go back to that view of the, looking, I guess, west, I guess it would be, that you had up just of the rendering. It was, back a few more.
This one or this one?
Yeah, this one. Oh, other one.
Yeah.
That one. Yeah. One consideration, and it sounds like you're going to go away and maybe do some thinking on this. And like I said, I'm not an architect, and I very much respect the UDC. One thought I had is, as I'm looking at this, is, if you considered even a 1 foot, 5th floor side setback on each side, and potentially created a little bit more of a definition between your 4th floor and your 5th floor, maybe making that cornice a little bit stronger. I personally, I just think to just bring the massing down on the 5th floor and create more side differentiation brings us a little, is one potential way to maybe address the chair's concerns, and concerns that I kind of have too. I mean, I'm sure this will get developed at some point in the future, but I can hear and see and understand the concern.
Yeah, I think if we thought that the building next door was never going to get developed, I would say that's a great solution, and it's certainly something we would be happy to consider. I think if it does get built right next door, what we're going to be looking at then is the potential of a 1 foot, or a very, very small gap between the two buildings at that point, which would probably be a real problem for us in terms of maintenance and things like that, stuff collecting there. So, if we were on the corner of a street, well, we would be wrapping the whole front facade on the side anyway in that case, I guess. But I think I do worry about, if and when, that neighboring property gets developed, and they're very likely to go, right against our building, that would create a potential problem for us.
I'll say this: while we can usually look at what does a block, potentially look like down the line. This is one application that's before us tonight, and this is what we have. I think you've got concerns by both me and Rob at the minimum that we'd like to see some work done on the side of that building, particularly with explanation of the materiality, as well as seeing what we can do with a setback on that 5th floor. That could make the building work a little bit. As I indicated earlier, we're not going to be taking a vote this evening, and we will be leaving it open for written comment. I think we do want to see a new rendering that might reflect some of the concerns that were raised by members of this board the next time for us. Excuse me. So, with that being the case, I don't know if there were any other comments or questions by members of planning board this evening, or by staff.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If I can ask one additional question while we're on the subject of materiality, I am hoping this is a very simple answer and that the answer is no, but there are no issues with reflectivity of the metal penthouse material as far as traffic, right?
No, we're going to use a matte. We'll be using a matte material there that is not highly reflective at all. So.
Thank you.
Amelia, thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments right now? Then is leave the written record open for testimony until, I'm looking at my calendar. Our next meeting is, Rebecca, correct me, the 4th of March, right?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Okay, so I'd like to leave the written record open until noon on Friday, the 26th of February. What's the email address to which people can send their written comments? Is it planning@somervillema.gov?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay, planning@somervillema.gov. We would welcome any additional written comments. We welcome the applicant back, hopefully with some suggested revisions on the 4th, or if they need further continuances, we'd be welcome to grant them. So at this time, the chair will move to adjourn the meeting of the planning board to reconvene on 4th of March, seconded by the clerk. Roll call vote. The chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Amelia votes aye.
John votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
Thank you all very much. We have a unanimous vote to adjourn, and I'll see you all in a few weeks.
Thank you very much. Yep, sooner the better. Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you all.